let's talk about this NATO summit, because something very funny happened. Zelensky thought that he could be a smartass and you know, go head to head with them. So he put out this giant tweet, and he's really just kind of throwing the toys out of the pram. He says it's unprecedented and absurd when time frame is not set, neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership, while at the same time vague wording about conditions is added even for inviting, just for inviting Ukraine. Oh, well, I'm so sorry. My deepest and sincerest apologies, Mr. President. Would you like a napkin with that? I mean, talk about ungrateful. This guy is so ungrateful that even the British defense minister, Ben Wallace, I don't expect you to know him, but he's our defense minister. Even he had to go and put Zelensky in check. And this is someone who supports Zelensky, right? Who's happy to have a war in Ukraine. So so Ben Wallace told him, we are not Amazon. To be clear, he actually said this last year already, but because Zelensky is opening his mouth, he let slip to a group of journalists that this is what he told Ukrainians. So last year, Ben Wallace is driving for 11 hours, and the Ukraine, like, you know, he gets out, and the Ukrainians just shove a paper in his face with a bunch of demands, like, we want this weapon and that weapon, and he told them, we're not Amazon, right? And he said it again, right? Because they don't show enough gratitude. Zelensky does not show enough gratitude, and he thinks that he's in charge when he's not. Even Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor in the US, also, you know, this looked like a coordinated thing that they were doing. So the UK and the US, they at the same time publicly humiliated Zelensky and told him that he needs to be nicer and more thankful for turning his country into a battlefield, you know. But you know, I mean, Zelensky is under the he's operating under the false impression that he's in charge. He's not in charge. He's an actor, and he broke character for a few seconds, and you know, he thinks that they were going to come to Vilnius and then just, you know, invite Ukraine, because this thing happens in steps, right? And he's angry that they were discussing it without him. I mean, he should remember that he's being invited to this thing. He has more weapons than actual members of NATO, okay? He has more NATO systems and weapons in his own country than people who are in NATO, who are members of NATO. But he's so desperate to be included that he thinks he can start, you know, throwing toys out of the pram. He's very mistaken. And then Zelensky keeps going. So look at this clip. This clip is from, it was from Sky News, and it's the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK.
Was your leader being a little bit, was there a hint of sarcasm in his response yesterday?
I believe it was responded by a little bit of sarcasm. President Zelensky's term when he said that each and every morning he will wake up and call Ben Wallace to thank him. I don't believe that this sarcasm is healthy. We don't have to show the Russians that we have something between us. They have to know that we are working together. If anything happens, Ben can call me and tell me everything he wants.
Yeah, it doesn't help, these spats between us and Ukraine. So is it forgotten? I saw your tweet yesterday. What did you mean by your tweet when you posted it? What was that reference to?
It was a reference to the Globe and Mail article.
Here we go. Yeah.
Yes, that's something the Americans felt when they were being asked constantly by your leadership at that time, begging them to come to help. That's what we also wanted. What I meant that at the end of the days, Americans came with everything, even with their soldiers.
She sounds like a child psychologist. What did you mean when you with that tweet when you posted it? So the Ukrainian ambassador thinks that, you know, American boots are going to come and save him, and Zelensky's Winston Churchill. Jesus Christ. Look, from 1939 to 1945, Winston Churchill was an okay-ish person. Outside of those couple of years, well, he did some very unsavory things, you know, like starving millions of people, being just an open racist. All right, so I don't know if they're aware of this in Ukraine, I don't know if the Mr. Ambassador is aware. It's not the best, best person to be. I understand the analogy that he's making, but it's a terrible one. It's a terrible one. He's just expecting, like, okay, give us whatever we want, no matter how how much we badger you and annoy you. It's incredible. It's really incredible. Like, they're so used to just getting what they want. They think that they can fracture, the defensive alliance. And then, I mean, I couldn't care less, but it's so funny that they're trying to make this look like it's a bad thing for Russia to see, and for people in general to know what is happening, right? So if the British defense minister or if Jake Sullivan are humiliating Zelensky and Zelensky's humiliating them, then it doesn't send a message of unity, and that's bad for Biden's re-election. Who gives a crap about your unity? These people have nothing in common with each other, except maybe, I don't know, their bank account, their bank balances and the schools they went to. That's it. I doubt most people even want their countries spending this much money on Ukraine. And even if there was no war, I doubt most people in Europe and in NATO even want, to have this war with Russia, a nuclear war. So it's 31 people, and you should remember it's also Ukraine and the Australians and New Zealand were also invited because the rest needed to have a couple of the other Five Eyes there. I don't think Canada was invited, but still, you had New Zealand, Australia, Ursula, and so the EU, and Zelensky, plus the other 31, right? Do you think these people are symbols of unity? I don't think so. It's good for people to know what's happening and to know the truth, but for them, it's not a good thing for you to know the truth. I mean, please just look at this horrendous photo op. It's so, choreographed and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
For the family photo,
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing photo ops and stuff like that. Of course, they all took the trouble and time to go there, and they're spending their time doing much worse things. But my point is that this whole thing is like pure war propaganda. They just want you to believe in NATO, and NATO's a beautiful thing, and everyone is united, and they all love each other, and don't show anyone what's really happening, whether it's on the front lines or behind the scenes. The only person who's happy with Zelensky is Lindsey Graham, right? So Lindsey Graham is like, he wants Ukraine and NATO now. He just wants to cut to the chase and go to World War III right away. He wants to cut to the chase. Maybe he's got issues or something. This whole summit is nothing more than a choreographed performance. That's it. They the only reason they had to rein in Zelensky is because he put them on the spot. And after that, it's just damage control. You can see the media. It's not like, why don't we get to the bottom of this? Let us get through this. We don't want to show the Russians that we're fighting or that there's any problem between us. It reminds me of the propaganda that you hear repeated in the West ironically about the Russians, right? Or let's say the Soviet Union or East Germany. So the stereotypes or the cliches you would hear are that in the Soviet Union, everything is choreographed. The government has to maintain this front, this illusion of, being, of everyone being united, conformity, and right, there's no freedom of thought, there's no freedom of opinion, of expression, nothing. It's just one cohesive unit. And ironically, that's what you have in the West. This is just one example, for just like some stupid comment like Zelensky saying that he wants that the time, what does he say? The timeline is absurd, right? That's the word he used, absurd. It's unprecedented and absurd that no timeline is set. And Ben Wallace says, we are not Amazon. Like, this is enough for them to start panicking. oh no, we have to show unity lest the Russians exploit our discord. I mean, it's really, really just crap. You see Erdogan over there? He looks a bit out of place, like he's lost. I think he's confused half the time, right? Yes, I like Russia. No, I don't like Russia. Yes, I want F-16s and I want an IMF loan. No, I don't. So why am I talking about Erdogan? Well, the thing is that Sweden is going to become the 32nd NATO member, right? And you can only become a member by unanimous consent. So Turkey was the only country putting its foot down. And it turns out that I was right. I told you that Turkey is going to keep putting its foot down as long as possible to get as many concessions, right, as it can. So what were some of those concessions? Extraditing PKK members, right? That's what the first thing that Erdogan wanted. He wanted arms embargo lifted, which he got, and now he gets F-16s, magically, right when he says, okay, I will not block Sweden's accession to NATO. Magically, all of a sudden, they agree to give him F-16s. And also, he gets an IMF loan between 11 to 13 billion, I think it was. Let's just say 11 billion, okay? I mean, I don't know why he would want to go there anyway. The IMF is a debt trap. They like to say China is debt trapping Africa and all this crap. There is no bigger debt trap than taking a loan from the IMF. This is like committing suicide. It's like, he's plunging his country into a really, really bad place. That is not a coincidence. And Biden is giving him that. Remember, IMF and World Bank, they're basically controlled by the United States. Like the UN, unfortunately. Right? But again, IMF and World Bank, I mean, their whole scheme, and MO is tricking you into taking a line of credit, and then when you default, when you can't pay, they'll squeeze you for political concessions. Okay, so, and then once you do that, then you can have more money, and countries that don't do it, they're just screwed. Again, I've done full-length videos about that before, but not surprised that it was about F-16s. I mean, you have to remember that Zelensky also wants F-16s. These are very... Yes, they're good planes. I think, like I told you, a good percentage of fighter jets, if you took all the fighter jets in the world, no matter the country, you would find that the most common one is the F-16. Okay, so it's used by many countries, and it's very good, but it's becoming old. Okay, so I don't know why he didn't ask for something else. He goes and buys the best of the best from the Russians, S-300, S-400, and then wants F-16s. Why don't you ask for something better? I mean, okay, this is I'm going off on a tangent now, but this is related to the NATO summit, and it's he was just trying to get as many concessions as possible. That was his play. In the end, Turkey said yes, and Turkey helps to expand NATO. Turkey is the largest army in NATO, and not necessarily the best, but in numbers, it's the largest. And you have to remember that Turkey is good to have in NATO from their point of view, because it puts you in close proximity to Russia, especially in the early days, or not early days, just the Cold War, right? During the Cold War. Back then, if you wanted to put missiles closer to Russia or in a place that is not in the middle of Europe, you wanted Turkey. You wanted Turkey because then you could flank the Russians or the Soviets back then. And that was really one of the main reasons to have Turkey. That's it. And of course, the Middle East, gives you access. I mean, Turkey is occupying a big chunk of Syria right now. So, you have the United States in the northeast, then Turkey to the north, and then down south you have Israel. So you basically got NATO plus Israel, although these are really the same actors in the end. Just like carving up Syria into multiple chunks. So it's very useful to have Turkey for that agenda, But I think this man is confused. I think he's very confused. He seems to want to be on good terms with the Russians. I'm talking about Turkey, right? So it's about Erdogan. He seems to want to be on good terms with the Russians, and he is. But then he goes and does this. Okay. Well, it's, I don't think NATO is going to be remembered in a very good light. There are some people who maybe they have, I don't know what their problem is. They have brain damage or something, or I don't know what it is. They think that NATO is defensive, and Russia is this and that. Put Russia aside. NATO was created to contain the Soviet Union. Okay. It has no purpose anymore because there is no Soviet Union. So it's like these people have no recollection of anything that happened between 1991 and 2014 or 2022, right? It's incredible. It's incredible. I don't know what their problem is. I not only not want to expand NATO, the goddamn thing should be dismantled. Why should the Warsaw Pact be dismantled, but NATO stays on? To fulfill what purpose? What purpose? Occupying Syria, destroying Libya, Afghanistan. What is the purpose? Ukraine is not worth the risk of nuclear war. It's just not worth the risk. It's just not. Maybe Zelensky or Ukrainians feel differently, but nuclear war concerns the entire planet. No one in Ukraine is fighting for, democracy. And even if they were, I'd like a definition of what that word is, because they seem to have a different one over at NATO. I'm sorry. It's just that Ukraine is not worth this risk. It's not. You cannot suspend the rules of politics and international relations and balance of power in Ukraine, just like you cannot choose to randomly, suspend the laws of physics. You have a tiny country compared to Russia. you have a small country next to a giant power inviting in an adversarial military alliance. You are going to piss the Russians off. And now what's really going to happen in Ukraine is you're going to end up with, 1/3 of Ukraine annexed by Russia, and what is essentially a stalemate. I don't think they will sign a peace agreement. It would be a miracle if they did, especially with these this room of charming people. Oh, I was wrong. I was mistaken. Trudeau was invited indeed. I was wondering to myself, why would they invite Australia and New Zealand and then not invite the other eye? No. It was all the Five Eyes. Anyway, just to go back to my point, you're going to end up with a stalemate. It would be a miracle if they signed a peace agreement with the Russians and Ukrainians. I don't think they will. They're right now the lines where Russia has dug itself in. Okay, man. Even if you could break through those lines, the physical task of dismantling them. Do you know how long it took to build those things? The actual lines themselves, right? The trenches, the dragon's teeth, the tank ditches or tank traps. Jesus, you got multiple layers of this crap, Never mind the barbed wire in the regular trenches. Ukraine they're not getting through. Not with, and again, this is just looking at the rest of Europe. I mean, Ukraine isn't really in Europe. I know they want to be, but they're not Europe. Ukraine, however, out of this entire room of people here, or all of these countries, Ukraine has the most combat efficient and combat experienced army. They do. As I said before, you have American units and German units trying to train Ukrainians, and it should be the other way around. If we're talking about combat in general. Obviously, a Ukrainian cannot train an American on an F-16. It's the other way around. I'm not talking about specific systems, but generally speaking, these Ukrainians are units that have come from the front. They're not fresh recruits. They have more experience than the people training them. So it's kind of ironic. But despite them being so proficient, they do not have what it takes right now to defeat Russia. This, short of a nuclear war, you are never defeating Russia, unless unless we're in Afghanistan and we're talking about the Mujahideen, and the CIA, but that's a different beast, right? This war here, I think, is going to be a stalemate. The Russians have no desire to go any further, obviously, because for them, these places that they annexed, not all of them. I mean, Crimea is a special case because it's always been majority ethnic Russian. Majority. That means over 50% are actually, they identify as Russian speakers, not speakers. They identify as Russian, nationals. They identify as Russians culturally, and they speak Russian, right? But in Eastern Ukraine, that's not the case that they're a majority. They're not a majority. That doesn't mean, though, that they're not large minorities. Do you understand? So, if you look at the regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia and the Donbass, you're going to have giant, big groups of Russian, ethnic Russians, even though they're not a majority. Okay, but they're still a very, very big part of the population. So it's enough. That's enough for the Russians to go in and protect them, and that's what happened. Because for them, the fact that Ukraine was shelling them was considered an attack on Russia itself. So they just went in, and now, in order to cement the agreements between the republics and integrate them into the Russian Federation and have defense pacts with them, they annexed them. This whole situation could have been avoided if these people in this room had respected their own word, their own signatures, if they had ratified Minsk I, Minsk II, and not clowned about. NATO is the reason that you have this war and that Russia is in Ukraine, and they annexed it. I don't know why Zelensky is so desperate to become an official member. Maybe in his mind, it's like they've caused him so much trouble that he might as well have the be in it. But if Ukraine were to join today, they would activate Article 5, and then, I mean, the text itself does not say this, but since NATO's founding, it's always been interpreted that Article 5 does mean, one for all and all for one. That if one member is under attack, everybody has to dive in and save them. So yeah, if Ukraine were to join today, you would have all these 31 countries, or 32 or 33 in that case, with Ukraine and Sweden officially at war with Russia. I mean, I think the Russians already feel like they're at war with NATO. I don't know why you have to activate Article 5 for this to be a reality. But yeah, I there's no denying that obviously this would up the ante. Let me show you this. This is Biden and Zelensky in Lithuania, and it's just a tiny clip.
The bad news for you is we're not going anywhere. You're stuck with us. The bad
God, that's so cringy. I don't know if that was a threat or otherwise, but it sounded like a threat. It sounded like some mob boss sitting there, like, good thing you paid for protection, right? Zelensky's in a bad place right now. Jesus, I would not want to be this guy, He's in a bad place. If I were in his shoes, I would want to be in NATO. You know why? Because how do you walk this back now? you can't unkill 300,000 Ukrainians and just snap your fingers and undo this whole situation. I mean, let's just take the whole world down, I suppose. Maybe that's his mentality. He has to either go and make peace with Russia, and I mean, that guy he's never going to be president again. He's gone. He can forget about. That's if they even let him. Remember, this guy's not running the show, so I'm just speaking in a hypothetical sense. He has one option, which is not an option, which is to make peace, and then he has the only option, which is to just keep doing what NATO want him to do, which is take all of these weapons, this crap that we don't need in the warehouses. You can have it. you can also have some other crap that our friends want to sell. And, you can keep killing Russians for us while we hide behind you, okay? So, for Zelensky and for Ukraine, Article 5 is a beautiful thing because then he could draw in the other countries. The thing is that Biden, Biden and the rest of them, they want to keep killing Russians without having to fully commit, okay? They don't want to fully commit. I'll just end on on a lighter note. I don't know if we can have a light note, with all of this, but there's a photo of Zelensky from the NATO summit. Okay, this photo was taken, and he's kind of just standing there by himself. And we have a phrase in English that says a picture is worth 1,000 words. This picture really is. It really says it all. It really says it all. I made a meme out of it. This is when you realize that your NATO crush only likes you as a proxy. I think it's got 2 million views now. It went viral. This guy is just standing there on his own. I mean, I do feel sorry for him to a certain extent, but at the same time, he should have known who these people are. They're killers. These people are killers. I think one of the worst things that NATO ever did, and that's really, there are a lot of contenders for this, but it's when they killed Gaddafi. It's not just like, you can talk about the state that Libya is in as a country, and obviously it's related to who's running it. You remove Gaddafi, no one's running it. Look at it now. But it's just the act of, they went into Libya, they put up a no-fly zone, they lynched this guy. He got lynched. Gaddafi is someone who helped pioneer this concept of having a single currency in Africa, right? Golden dinar, Pan-Africanism. He's one of the originals of Pan-Arabism. He's one of these officers who did these coups and took power. Like Nasser in Egypt and so on. Because after the French and the British had finished destroying Africa and the Middle East, you had a lot of political instability, right? So you would always have coups, and then someone would take over, and they do a crap job of running the place. And these men, Nasser, or whether it's Assad in Syria. In Syria, you had guys who were president for 24 hours. I think there are 2 guys who were president for 24 hours. That's how unstable it was, thanks to the French. So Assad, I'm talking about his father. Now, he, along with Nasser, along with Gaddafi, these are guys who brought stability to the country. They brought stability. That's a fact. Some people don't like it, especially in the West. That's their problem. But these people brought stability. And Gaddafi, he brought prosperity too. Okay, he brought prosperity. Libya, very high living standard, best in the entire continent. Africa, 54 countries, right? That's saying something. And they killed him, man. They killed him. Gaddafi used to send weapons to the IRA. They're revolutionaries somewhere. He's going to support them. He himself, like I said, a revolutionary, Pan-Arabism, Pan-Africanism. These concepts, they are threats to Western countries, especially, ones that have lost their own empires, right? This terrifies people in France. They want to keep their claws in Africa. Their hidden claws in Africa, and you can't have people like Gaddafi. So as much as they want to criticize him, I really don't care, because like I said, he's a real one. And these people, they killed him. Zelensky should have known who he is getting himself involved with. These people are killers. They are a bunch of disgusting, nasty war criminals. And I don't care what Russia does in Ukraine. That doesn't change what I just said about NATO. NATO could plant trees and roses in Ukraine. and they would still be killers. They could do nothing but plant trees. Trees. You know, the fucking trees that grow. NATO, all of these people could spend billions on planting trees, just trees, in Ukraine, and they would still be killers. They don't get to walk away from what they did in Libya, because what they did, it's not something in the past. It's still the present case, right? Libya is what they made it. Syria is occupied by 2 NATO countries. And this is notwithstanding the mess in Ukraine, which is also their making, right? But I'm saying even if they did nothing but nice things in Ukraine, they would still be killers. So Zelensky should know who he is getting himself involved with. You know, when Biden says you're stuck with us, I would take that as a threat. Zelensky's laughing because he's in a room full of journalists, but they had to hit him on the head a little bit and remind him who's in charge. That's why he was told we are not Amazon. And I found that funny as hell, honestly. We are not Amazon. You know, the difference is that Amazon get paid. When you buy, like I said, you buy something from Amazon, you pay Amazon. Zelensky is not paying the UK anything. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. It's the other way around. These weapons are not free. They don't fall from the sky. I mean, once you've used them, they do. But the point is that these weapons, a lot of companies are making money off of this, right? BAE Systems is probably the biggest in the UK. Enfield, Rolls-Royce, they Boeing over in the US and so on, they're all making money from this war. These weapons are not free. And guess who pays for these weapons? It's the British public. The gas prices that have gone up, the energy bills that have gone up, groceries, shopping, month-to-month bills, people cannot afford them anymore. Those have gone up thanks to the sanctions, right? He keeps pushing for sanctions, Mr. Zelensky, right? Not that he needed to. They're more than happy to the EU are more than happy to do that, as are the Americans, But all of these things cost something, and Zelensky and Ukraine, they're certainly paying the price in human cost. But like I said, when Mr. Wallace is saying we are not Amazon, at least Amazon get paid. Yeah, people in Britain, they have a heightened risk of nuclear war. Like I said, that concerns everyone. It's not just Ukraine and it's not just the UK. That concerns everyone, because if you have any, even if it's a quote unquote low yield nuclear bomb, which some psychos calling themselves journalists want to drop on Russia. Low yield or high yield. That's the last nuclear bomb you ever see. There will be no one left to see anything after that. Within 30 minutes, the entire planet will be wiped out, and the rest will die from hunger. That's what will happen. Okay? So, in my opinion, I go back to what I said. Again, I feel bad for Ukraine. I think Boris Johnson should not have gone down and told Zelensky to back out of negotiations. But increasing the risk of nuclear war, Ukraine is not worth it. These tens of billions, and again, this is not Zelensky's fault. It's especially their fault. These people at NATO, especially them, because remember, when you send someone like Joe Biden into the White House, this guy is not working on behalf of whatever stack of Bibles he swears on and whatever he says in his election campaign. He comes into this office as a representative of the private sector, and the same goes for Macron, who just sent new missiles to Ukraine from France. The same goes for number 10. So we know who these people serve from the get-go. But my point here is that the situation in Ukraine, not the country Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine is not worth heightening the risk of nuclear war with Russia. It's just not. And now they're going to tell you that, Putin is actually an idiot because what he's done is he's, this is the IQ level of these morons who work at the Wall Street Journal. They'll say like, oh, well, Putin said that he's against NATO, and he doesn't want Ukraine in NATO. But now, NATO's actually expanding with Finland and Sweden. So actually, this whole plan backfired on the Russians. Ha 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 ha. Really? Why didn't they give Ukraine an invitation? Looks like it's working to me. Is Ukraine in NATO? No. They won't even do that because these people like Biden, they're such cowards. And don't get it twisted. If you had a Republican in charge, they do the same exact thing. They're such cowards. They want to fight the Russians without fighting them, right? So they'll have the Ukrainians do the fighting while they sit back and make money and tell you how much they care about Ukraine and all this crap, okay? The thing is, though, Finland and Sweden were neutral countries, more or less, right? Just like Germany was a neutral country. Germany's a bit worse, though, right? Germany... Finland and Sweden are not exactly the great geopolitical powers that have now entered NATO and increased NATO strength. Who the hell cares about Finland and Sweden? What power do they represent? What? You think Russia's scared of Finland and Sweden? They are inconsequential. They still encircle Russia, so don't get me wrong. But and this is the thing. It's the Americans now who will go into Sweden and Finland and deploy their systems there. This is why the Russians were what they were complaining about before the war started, right? So this is December 2021. They didn't tell the Americans or NATO as an organization. They didn't say, we want you to dismantle NATO, even though NATO should be. They didn't say that, and they didn't say we want Poland and all these countries that encircle us to leave NATO. They said, they're going the extra mile and saying we don't want American troops in Poland, for example, on our border. Polish troops in Poland, that's their country, but we don't want your troops at our border using NATO as a cloak, right? So that is where the danger comes from. Nevertheless, the only problem with Finland is the giant border, and they've had wars with each other, Russia and Finland. So they're not exactly on friendly terms. But anyway, the big question here is Ukraine. It was never about Finland and Sweden. But again, I think if you look at that and don't consider it a provocation, there's something wrong with your head. There's a Russian warship right now in Cuba for 5 days, and CNN are already shitting their pants. So if I think that speaks for itself, right? That video that we just watched together. Here, we'll end with one last video from Zelensky, okay?
And you gave us huge support. I want to thank too.
So that on the right is the United States. I'm not quite sure where. I think it's probably in California. Maybe Skid Row, right? In LA.
To all Americans, we understand that it's more than 43 billion for today. It's big support, and I understand that it's all your money, but you have to know that you spend this money for not just for fighting. You spend this money for our lives, and I think that we save.
So he's saying the 43 billion that Americans spend. You see, this is Zelensky being grateful. After he got a bollocking from Ben Wallace and Jake Sullivan, he started making videos every 30 minutes saying thank you. A little gratitude is certainly warranted. I'd feel fucking insulted if I were giving you all these weapons and you can't even say thank you. But anyway, he's saying thank you for the 43 billion or whatever the figure is now that you've spent. Zelensky, you should try diplomacy. It's a lot cheaper and a lot more effective. You really should. But I understand, you've got handlers and so on. So you're not exactly in a position of, you're not exactly in a position of power right now. I get it. They just need him as a proxy. He's just an actor and a figurehead. That's all he is to them, unfortunately. Poor Zelensky. On some level, you got to feel sorry for the bastard. I mean, when Biden looks at you like that and says, you're stuck with us, he's going to come sniff you in a second. Oh, Jesus. Oh, God. Okay, I said I was going to end, but actually, I want to show you one last thing from the summit. This is Stoltenberg. You know, they they extended his mandate just recently. Okay, so he's got the same job, and we'll be seeing more of his ranting a bit more. Take a look.
Imminent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. So the most important thing we can do is to continue to provide weapons, ammunition, military support to Ukraine, because unless Ukraine prevails as a nation, as a democratic nation in Europe, there is no issue to be discussed about security guarantees or membership in NATO at all. I'll agree that.
Let me translate. Again, it's my job to translate politics into plain English and cut through the BS. What he's saying is that if Ukraine doesn't deliver, doesn't return on investment, okay, they don't deliver with results after we've given them all these weapons, well, you know, NATO membership's not going to matter, because why would we want Ukraine after that, right? If you don't kill enough Russians for us, you won't exist. This is very dangerous. You should not take this man's words lightly, because he means what he's saying. They really are looking at Ukraine like a piece of meat. You know, it's like world elites. I mean, they're capitalists at the end of the day. You know, it's all about return on investment. You know, how many Russians can you kill with these weapons? Are you going to deliver for us? They don't give a crap how many Ukrainians die. They really don't. Where is the proof for the statement? Look at the death toll. We're in July 2023. This problem has been happening since 2014, really since 2008. Okay, when they said we want you in, they're always going to use this. You know, it's like they'll dangle NATO membership in front of Ukraine. They'll get Zelensky to bite. Okay, and what Boris Johnson did is he went in and told him, like, you know, you need to keep going with this war. Don't sign any peace agreement with Russia in Istanbul, in Turkey, because we are going to give you XYZ, and we promise you. Again, you know, like I said, Zelensky should have known who he's dealing with. These people are mobsters. You know, they are not going to be there for him when he falls. And this is the problem with Ukraine. Ukraine now is going to be chopped up into, I don't know how much the line, or rather the front, moves. I don't think it's going to move that much in the foreseeable future. But again, wars change every second. Right now, the way it is now, if this stalemate continues, you're going to have about 1/3 of Ukraine that is now in Russia, annexed by Russia, and millions of Ukrainians that have been turned into refugees outside, so externally and internally displaced. And then also, you know, the number of people killed, so it's around 300,000 Ukrainians now. I don't know what the figure is for the Russians. Obviously, it's going to be ugly no matter what. Whatever the Russians say and whatever the Ukrainians say, always take with a giant pinch of salt, because they both have incentive to exaggerate their own gains and you know, minimize their own losses. Every country does that. But you know, just from the perspective of the land, okay, so if you put aside the number of refugees and people killed, which you shouldn't, but they are saying we need NATO, because NATO will deter the Russians from taking, you know, Ukrainian soil. Well, obviously not. Hasn't really worked, has it? You know, they act like Russia is just dying to go into Europe and swallow up countries. Like, this is not the Soviet Union. This is not, you know, 1945. This is, we're in the 21st century, man. The Soviet Union is gone. The Russians don't give a crap about Europe. They really don't. You know, you took 300 billion from me, I'd be pretty pissed at you. You're not getting anything from me. Which is what the sanctions did, right? This whole summit that they've had is such a pathetic clown show. It really is. I mean, can you imagine? Let's imagine the Warsaw Pact was still around, and you have you got the Russians meeting with Poland, right, and all the Soviet satellite states, and taking photos together in 2023. I mean, this would be a laughing stock in the West. This would be a laughing stock. you would have caricatures coming out of your goddamn ears. Wouldn't you? You should not, you should look at the NATO summit as no different. It is a laughingstock. Although again, when you take into consideration what they've done, it's no laughing matter, especially with Libya, Yugoslavia. Christ, I didn't even mention Yugoslavia earlier. You know, they still got cluster bombs all over Yugoslavia, and you know, the funny thing is that at the start of this war, if you raised, for example, the point that the United States and NATO, they invaded Iraq, they bombed Yugoslavia, they did all of these things that they're criticizing Russia for. The default response from mainstream media and people with no brains is that this is whataboutism. But now when you raise the issue of cluster bombs, they tell you, well, Russia's used cluster bombs in Ukraine as well. So now this whataboutism is suddenly fine with cluster bombs. You know, they have a point, and what did I tell you the other day? I said shame on the Russians, and I'll say it again. Shame on them for using cluster bombs. They have no excuse to use this. Shame on them. I mean that. Really shame on them. Most of the casualties, most 94% of cluster bomb casualties are civilians. I'm pretty sure Russians are good at math. The thing is that whataboutism is really just a way of someone saying, don't tell me I'm a hypocrite. That's what it means. When they tell you that, it means don't point out my hypocrisy. So that's why you shouldn't, you know, they don't like you talking about Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and et cetera, and Yugoslavia. You know, they don't want to be told that they're hypocrites. Although again, I think by any metric, Ukraine is not even as bad as those things, but it will get a lot worse if they keep this up.